The moment I laid eyes on the house, I knew it was the one. A sprawling, well-maintained property nestled in a peaceful, upscale neighborhood just outside the city. A place where I could finally relax. After 3 decades of serving as a federal judge, presiding over some of the most complex legal battles in the country, I had earned a quiet, private life. No more courtroom drama, no more high-stakes decisions, no more watching people lie under oath while knowing the truth all along. I had spent my career ensuring justice was served, but now, I just wanted to indulge in my lifelong passion, restoring classic cars. The 3-car garage attached to my new home was the perfect place for that. Spacious, well-ventilated, and far enough from the main road that I wouldn't disturb anyone, it was everything I had dreamed of. Little did I know, my peaceful retirement was about to be shattered by someone who thought they could impose their own twisted sense of law and order. I had only lived in the neighborhood for a few weeks before she appeared. Linda Davenport, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, arrived at my doorstep one crisp Saturday morning, dressed in an iron pantsuit, her clipboard clutched tightly in her manicured hands. I had heard whispers about her from my neighbors, the dictator of the block, a woman who thrived on control, issuing violations over mailbox colors and lawn decorations. But I had assumed, perhaps naively, that she wouldn't bother me. After all, my home was outside the HOA's jurisdiction, carefully chosen for that exact reason. "Good morning," she said, her voice dripping with fake politeness, though her beady eyes already swept over my garage like a hawk hunting its prey. "I noticed you've been spending a lot of time in your garage. May I ask what you're doing?" I smiled, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Restoring classic cars," I replied. "It's a hobby of mine." Her lips pursed into a thin line. "You know, our community values a certain aesthetic. We wouldn't want to turn this place into a," she waved a hand vaguely, "mechanic shop, now would we?" My smile didn't waver. "Good thing my property isn't part of the HOA then." Her nostrils flared slightly, but she recovered quickly, forcing another tight-lipped grin. "Well, we'll see about that," she said before turning sharply on her heel and marching away. I should have known that was just the beginning. A few days later, an official-looking envelope appeared in my mailbox, marked with the HOA's emblem. I opened it to find a formal warning, stating that my workshop was in violation of community standards. I chuckled, shaking my head. I wasn't under the HOA's jurisdiction. That should have been the end of it. But, just to be thorough, I drafted a polite but firm response, enclosing a copy of my property deed that clearly stated I was exempt from their rules. I mailed it off and figured that would settle things. I underestimated Linda's determination. Within the week, a second letter arrived. This time, the tone was more aggressive. "Cease and desist all non-residential activities immediately, or fines will be issued." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. This was no longer just about my garage, it was about control. I had seen this kind of behavior countless times in my courtroom, small-minded individuals wielding whatever sliver of power they had to dominate others. Linda wasn't after justice. She was after submission. And I had no intention of bowing to someone who had appointed herself judge, jury, and executioner of a neighborhood she didn't even fully control. Rather than respond with another letter, I decided to confront Linda directly. I found her pruning her roses in her perfectly manicured front yard, her smug satisfaction evident as she saw me approach. "Linda," I said evenly, holding up the letter, "we need to talk." She barely looked up, feigning disinterest. "Oh, about what?" I exhaled through my nose, keeping my temper in check. "You keep sending me these notices, but as I've stated before, I'm not part of the HOA. Your rules don't apply to me." She straightened, crossing her arms. "The community," she said grandly, "has a standard to uphold. Just because your property is technically outside the HOA's reach doesn't mean you can disrupt our way of life." I tilted my head, studying her. "Disrupt? I'm restoring cars in my own garage, on my own property. Who, exactly, is being harmed by this?" She hesitated for only a fraction of a second before regaining her composure. "It's an eyesore. It lowers property values." I let out a low chuckle. "Ah, so that's the real issue. Property values. Not noise, not safety, just money. Her jaw tightened. "You'll regret this," she hissed. And with that, I knew the battle had truly begun. The next few weeks were a game of endurance. Every morning, a new complaint arrived in my mailbox. Noise complaints, claims of oil spills, fabricated zoning violations. Neighbors, ones I had never even spoken to before, started throwing side glances my way. At first, I thought maybe Linda had convinced them I was some sort of menace. Then I learned the truth. She had been spreading rumors behind my back. I was apparently running an illegal auto business from my garage, selling stolen car parts on the black market, and my personal favorite, harboring dangerous chemicals that could explode at any moment. I caught wind of it when my next-door neighbor, a retired firefighter named Joe, stopped me one afternoon. "Hey, Matt," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know this is probably nonsense, but Linda's been telling folks you've got hazardous materials in your garage. That true?" I let out a humorless laugh. "Joe, you've seen my garage. It's cleaner than most restaurants." He smirked. "Figured as much. Just thought you should know what she's up to." Linda wasn't trying to enforce rules. She was trying to turn the neighborhood against me. And when the whispers and complaints didn't work, she escalated. I started receiving HOA fines in the mail. $500 for community disruption. Then $1,000. Then $5,000. I ignored them all. Without legal backing, they were nothing more than paper threats. But Linda wasn't done yet. One evening, as I was finishing up some polishing on a 1967 Mustang, I saw flashing red and blue lights reflecting off my garage walls. A police cruiser rolled into my driveway, and 2 officers stepped out. Linda stood triumphantly on the sidewalk, arms crossed, looking like she had just caught a criminal red-handed. I wiped my hands on a rag and walked over, keeping my expression neutral. "Evening, officers. What seems to be the problem?" The older officer sighed. "We got a report about an unauthorized auto repair shop operating here." I chuckled. "Let me guess, Linda?" The younger officer's eyes flicked to Linda, who was now speaking rapidly. "He's been violating community guidelines. Running a business. It's completely illegal." The older officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, this isn't a commercial property complaint. It's a residential call. We're here to see if any laws are actually being broken." I handed over my property deed, showing my exemption from HOA rules, and even let them inspect my garage. When they found nothing illegal, the officer turned back to Linda. "Ma'am," he said, his voice firm, "this is a misuse of emergency services. Do it again, and you could face charges." Linda's face twisted in outrage, but she had no choice but to storm off in fury. Linda wasn't one to admit defeat. The next morning, I woke up to construction noise outside. Stepping onto my porch, I stared in disbelief. She had ordered an HOA fence to be built directly across my driveway, blocking me in. This wasn't just harassment anymore, it was illegal. And it was the final straw. I pulled out my phone and made a single call. "Yes, this is Judge Matthew Reynolds. I need a county inspector here. Now." As the construction crew continued hammering posts into the ground, I stood at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, watching with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. These workers had no idea they were being used as pawns in Linda's personal vendetta. I approached one of them, a gruff-looking man in an orange vest, and tapped him on the shoulder. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Who gave you permission to build this?" The worker glanced at his clipboard, then back at me. "HOA directive," he muttered. "They said this section of the neighborhood needed a privacy barrier." I chuckled, shaking my head. "You do realize you're blocking a legally registered driveway, right?" His brow furrowed, but before he could respond, the sound of tires crunching against pavement caught our attention. A white county inspector's truck rolled up, and out stepped a man I knew well, James Holloway, a no-nonsense inspector who had no patience for HOA overreach. James barely looked at me before turning his full attention to the fence. "What in the hell is this?" he muttered, pulling out a measuring tape. He paced the length of the obstruction, scribbling on his notepad before turning to Linda, who had just arrived, a smug expression on her face. Mrs. Davenport, James began, his tone clipped. This fence is in direct violation of zoning laws. You can't obstruct a private driveway, especially not on non-HOA property. Linda's smirk faltered. But the community voted. James cut her off with a sharp wave of his hand. I don't care if the Pope voted on it. This is illegal. You have 24 hours to remove it, or the county will fine the HOA for every day it remains. Linda's face twisted in fury, but there was nothing she could do. I took a step closer to her, my voice low enough for only her to hear. You should have done your homework, Linda. I've spent my life upholding the law. You really thought I wouldn't know my rights? She clenched her fists, but before she could spit out another argument, James gave the final order. Take it down. Now. The workers, looking more than happy to be done with this mess, immediately started dismantling the fence. As I turned to walk away, I could practically feel the steam radiating from Linda's ears. She had lost again. But I knew, deep down, she wasn't done. The fence fiasco had shaken Linda, but instead of retreating, she doubled down. She was desperate now, her grip on power slipping through her fingers. And when a person like Linda starts losing control, they start grasping at anything they can. The next morning, I opened my laptop to find my name splashed across the local neighborhood forum. Former judge turns home into junkyard. Is our community at risk? Accompanying the post was a zoomed-in photo of my garage, taken from an angle that made it seem cluttered and chaotic. It was a blatant smear attempt designed to rally the community against me. For a brief moment, I considered ignoring it. But then I saw the comments. I heard he's running an illegal business. This is why property values are dropping. The HOA should do something. I exhaled slowly, rubbing my temples. This was how it started: lies, rumors, public pressure. I had seen it in the courtroom 1,000 times before. But Linda had made a crucial mistake. She had taken this battle public. And that meant I could fight back in full view of the neighborhood. I made a few phone calls, then set up an open garage event for that weekend. I invited everyone, neighbors, local reporters, even the town's historical society. When the day arrived, my garage doors were wide open, displaying my beautifully restored classic cars. People strolled in, admiring the vehicles, asking questions, realizing just how wrong Linda had been. A local journalist, after hearing about Linda's accusations, ran a real story the next day. HOA president's personal vendetta against classic car collector backfires. By the time the article hit, the tide had turned. Neighbors who had once thrown me side glances now approached me with sheepish smiles. Sorry about all that nonsense, one of them said. Linda's been running this place like a kingdom for years. It's about time someone stood up to her. Linda's grip on the HOA had always relied on fear. But once people stopped fearing her, her power crumbled. The board members, many of whom had quietly tolerated her antics for years, finally saw their chance. At the next HOA meeting, Linda stormed in, demanding emergency action to preserve community integrity. She ranted about how my garage was ruining the neighborhood, how people needed to take a stand, how if they didn't act now, property values would plummet. But this time, instead of nodding along, the board members stayed silent. Greg Dawson, the HOA's legal advisor, cleared his throat. Linda, he said carefully, we've been reviewing some things. And we have some concerns. He slid a thick file across the table. It turns out you've been misusing HOA funds for personal expenses, unauthorized purchases, unapproved fines, money that just vanished. Linda's face paled. That's ridiculous, she snapped. I've only ever done what's best for the community. Linda had expected to walk into that meeting and rally her troops. Instead, she found herself under investigation. The board voted her out on the spot. Furious and humiliated, Linda did what desperate people always do. She tried to sue. She filed a lawsuit against me personally, claiming I had damaged her reputation and intentionally disrupted community harmony. I had to give her credit for sheer audacity. When I received the court summons, I didn't even need a lawyer. I had spent decades writing legal arguments just like this one. I walked into that courtroom, stood before the judge, and in less than 5 minutes had the entire case dismissed. Linda sat there, slack-jawed, as the judge warned her about filing frivolous lawsuits. The case was over before it even began. By now, Linda had lost everything: her power, her credibility, even her legal battle. But instead of bowing out gracefully, she did something even I didn't expect. She started a petition to ban me from the neighborhood. She went door to door, clipboard in hand, spinning one final tale of how I was a danger to the community. But this time, the neighbors weren't buying it. When she knocked on my next-door neighbor Joe's door, he smirked. "You know what, Linda," he said. "I'd rather live next to a guy who restores cars than a woman who tries to control everyone's lives." Then he shut the door in her face. That was the moment Linda finally understood. She had lost. A week later, an official code enforcement notice appeared on Linda's door. Turns out, while she had been so obsessed with controlling everyone else, she had failed to take care of her own property. She had unauthorized modifications on her home, an illegal backyard extension, and worst of all, she had been ignoring violation warnings for years. The city fined her thousands of dollars. Linda had spent so much time hunting me down, she had walked straight into her own trap. The for sale sign appeared on Linda's lawn 2 months later.